The entire point of gesture drawing really is to teach us how to grab life. Grab that feeling of life, that energy of life, and then instill it in our own imaginatively drawn characters. We've now learned dynamic shape gestures. We've learned dynamic form gestures. We have an idea of how we can go about doing those. We're going to engage in exercises on them in our assignments. But now we want to move on to doing anatomical gestures. The important thing to remember when we do this, though, is that we're not trying to do a photocopy of the gesture. We're trying to take the anatomical gesture, take some of the nuance and the hints of the anatomy, and let that help our anatomical study as well. But really create an image that really portrays and communicates effectively the gesture that we're seeing, and maybe even more effectively if we can dramatize it a little bit, right? So we're not going for a photocopy of the gesture, right? We're not just drawing an observational life drawing of our life models or our gesture photos, all right? The second thing is that we want to work in a rough and refined stage. Rough, because if we start refined, we're going to take long, we're going to draw slowly, it's going to just end up being horrible and stiff, and that's why we want to do the roughs, and then the refined to really just enhance what we've done in the rough and just clean things up a little bit, and there we can take some time and make things look a little bit more professional. So I'm going to start here on a rough layer that I have, and then I'll work on a refined afterwards. If you're on paper, you'll do your rough, and then you will just kind of erase it with a kneaded eraser, and then go into your refined drawing. So what I'm going to do here is kind of indicate the head, and I'm going to be very rough, very loose. I'm not trying to create a photocopy. It's very important. And I'm going to get that line of action in. And I'm going to push that line of action even a little bit more here. Get that angle a little bit more extreme. I'm going to use some general measurements. Get that shoulder line in there. See that elbow line in a sense. Why not? They're aligned. It helps align things. And let's get that pelvic line in. Something like this. Something like that. All right, just helps to lay out elements. And actually, line of action, let's build a center line right near it as well. That can help us position things. And I'm going to get this form in and really have that dynamic feeling going through. And so I'm going to mix up, while I'm doing this, I'm going to mix up my shape and form. Dynamic form and dynamic shape gestures. Mix them up, and she has actually a very long stomach area. Now that I look at that. And keep things loose and keep things dynamic. Let's get those dynamic shapes in there. Draw a leg here. Just check that knee line is relatively right. Just trying to keep the proportions going smoothly here. And drawing in that front leg dynamic shape, dynamic form, and we'll get that foot in there very much like that. All right. And a key thing as well is just be very quick about it. Be quick. Draw quickly. If you draw slowly, you will fall into the trap of things starting to look stiff, and that is probably one of the worst things that could happen to your work, is that it is stiff and just lacks the dynamism, lacks that dynamic feel. And here I'm copying the shape of this contour here, just so that it looks a little bit more correct. But I want to keep dynamism as a forefront. So if that leg's doing that, this one is doing the opposite thing, the very opposite thing. All right. Coming in here, I'm going to make this more extreme. This crunch happening here, I'm going to make it a little bit more extreme. We can get that breast shape in a little bit there. And here I'm going to follow the kind of indication of the skin going over my sphere of my stomach, going down into that pelvis area. I want to keep things nice and dynamic. Let's get these arms. Clearly this lower arm is doing that, so it has that directionality to it. So the upper arm will be doing something like that. And I'm going to really push those angles more. And pushing them is really a lot of what it is about that we're doing here, right? We want to push things, we want drama. And interest. Drama gives us that visual interest. Right, and this shape is something like that. And do you see how when we're pushing it, we get that feeling of life in just the simple drawing of it? I'm not going to over detail the hand here, just kind of copy the shape a little bit. That's okay. Get the general feeling going. Let's just see the angle of her head is very much something like this. Her eye line is something like that. Just get that general tilt of her head in. And then we're going to draw in her hair. It's not necessary. And get that neckline in. And really capture those forms. And so what I'm going to do, and really capture that dynamism, sorry, that's what I meant to say, more of the dynamism. Okay, let's just get her little clavicle line in there, that little indentation that joins her collarbone. Help us calculate this other breast position, so more like here. And then the muscle actually goes up there, something like that. And we can draw in this, just this very basic shape here for the bra section. To keep the heights the same. And we'll put in the underwear as well. It's around here. Keeping in mind contouring that shape. All right, and now that I've done that, and I feel like I'm really getting those lines of action reading and getting the essence of the pose, I'm just going to lightly erase this. I'm not doing the refined sketch just yet. Just going to lighten that up. I'm going to come in here, and now I'm going to just kind of get the anatomy a little bit more dynamic, using the hints from the reference material just to place things. I'm not going to over detail her head there. Get the bend of the arms in. So for example, stuff I'll take is like here, I'm taking the elbow. And I'll borrow some of these angles from the hand. And notice how fast I'm being and how loose I'm being. Now I've said that this is curving that way, but I actually feel upon closer inspection, no, let me just think about this. It's curving that way. Yeah, this is actually curving more like that. So I just put my opposing curves in incorrectly there, no big deal. Just correct it. Alright, oops, that one is a bit parallel. Let's just correct it like that. And we do have a big mass coming out there, so that does make sense. And I'm going to just kind of follow my dramatized angles a little bit. Get that in there. I don't want to sacrifice the drama, right? And our kind of exaggeration of what's happening in the forms. Indicate that anatomy. Do some here. And so I'm using the reference more as a guide to help me grasp the gesture better, rather than using it as an image that I'm trying to replicate. And I think it's something that needs to be constantly reiterated, is we're not trying to do a photocopy or a exact drawing. We're trying to capture the essence of things, right? Trying to capture the essence of things. So I'm going to come up here and get that in. And you know you're successful when you say, hey, do I feel like there's life in what I'm doing? Do I feel like I can feel the flow happening, right? The opposing curves flow happening, the rhythms happening through the forms that I'm drawing. Being loose, right? Being very loose with your lines. And not being afraid to be a little bit rough. It's not the end of the world if something's a little bit rough. Let's get this in, some quick lines here, just to get the basic shapes in there. And let's put in that shoulder muscle that's clearly being indicated at that section. All right, another muscle there, muscle line. And I'm going to indicate the navel as well. Put that in there and just feel out. Do I feel like I've pushed the pose enough? All right. Just want to have pushed it enough. I'm not trying to create a photocopy once again. All right. And we'll just make her head just a little bit bigger at the back area. All right. And once that's done, can then just lower the opacity here or do an erasing. Go to my refined layer, or simply could just draw it on top. And I'll come in now and just really get the lines that I want in as loosely and as freely as possible. And I'm not even really using the reference much when I do this. I'm just kind of making sure that as I look at these forms, I'm being loose and I'm being gestural and trying to just get that energy and not lose it, and have the same energy in my arm constantly working, right, in my arm, in my wrist as I'm drawing. Getting that head shape in. And I do have an example for you, which I will show you shortly, of what it shouldn't look like, right? What these really shouldn't end up looking like. Just indicating some of these lines, grabbing that, just make that a little bit more accurate. Can put some line weights where I feel I need them as I do this. Usually I do line weighting at the end, even when I'm doing my artworks. I will just do all the lines that I need and then do the line weights at the end just to enhance the drawing. Keeping the flow, keeping things loose. And you don't have to stick exactly to your plan either. So if you have some deviations where you're thinking, hey, you know, this would be much more dramatic if I bent, say in this example, maybe I bent the leg a little bit more, it would add to the drama and enhance the gesture a little bit more, then I would say do it, right? Ultimately, you want a natural feeling piece, not over detailing the hands or the feet, something to keep in mind. So here we're using all that knowledge of the dynamic forms, the dynamic shapes, and also drawing loosely, having dynamic lines, right? Lines that have directionality. Using opposing curves theory there. And literally I was just going this curve, that curve, this curve, that curve. I wasn't overthinking the anatomy of it. Being loose with the lines. Put that line like that. And I'll enhance this overlap here with the darker line. Let's just have it taper a little bit more. Put in the navel. We can indicate some of these anatomical lines just for effect. So the rib cage over there, a little bit of a rib cage. And let's just finish off this basic hand shape here, just kind of indicating these details. And relatively speaking, this is something we want to end up with. Not too many crazy details, but definitely feeling the flow of the pose, having things loose, having things natural. And if we want to tidy it up a little bit more, we can come in and line weight things that are overlapping. But the key thing, and this is really what I want you to remember, is your goal is, how can I best capture the feeling of life? We're not interested really in recreating an exact copy of something. No, we want to steal all the best things from reality and use it in our imaginative pieces. And that's really what we're doing. That's really what we want to learn about and do here. All right, and that would be a completed anatomy gesture drawing where we're really grabbing things and pushing things and just trying to capture that gesture. Now, let me show you an example. I did an example of what this shouldn't look like. All right, it shouldn't look like something like this that is trying to be the exact representation of the gestural pose or the gestural reference that you're using, right? That is not what we're trying to do. Please don't do that. Please don't sit and manually copy the contours and the outlines and the shapes of things, right? That's not what we want to do. Anatomical gesture drawing is not anatomy drawing, right? That our goal is the gesture, it's the feeling, it's the life. So don't do this, right? Don't do this. Even there's a symbol on my cursor. Bad. Let's not do this, right? We want to really capture the things we need, right? Capture the flow, capture the forms, get the looseness, exaggerate the pose a little bit, right? And learn how to actively take what we want from the gesture so that we can then implement it into our own work. Let's move on to the next lesson.